I love Pathfinder 2e, but do hero points need fixing? Pathfinder gives players a resource called hero points that they can spend to turn fate in their favor in the game. They're kinda like D&D's inspiration, but not. There is criticism out there about the default hero point system, and there are people who have come up with variant rules. I'll talk about some of them and share my thoughts. I am currently in lawyer hell, and so I gave myself the assignment of doing a relatively low effort video for me this time, and also low commitment. I'm actually not pronouncing a recommendation in this video. I want to spur discussion. First, to introduce myself, I am Ronald, the Rules Lawyer. I am a lawyer who runs tabletop role-playing games. My preferred system is Pathfinder 2e. I ran an after-school, middle-school RPG class for several years. Support my Patreon if you haven't yet. I don't make money as a lawyer. For an explanation, look at the video whose thumbnail's on the screen. Supporting my Patreon gives you ad-free early access to many of my videos and exclusive content. So what are hero points and how do they work? If you come from D&D 5th edition, they are similar to inspiration, but not quite. Like in D&D, you earn hero points through play when the game master decides to give one to you, and they are encouraged to give one to you when you do something selfless, daring, or beyond normal expectations, or for rewarding anything the GM wants to incentivize, like a player acting in character, doing good roleplay, or coming up with a creative idea. Unlike in D&D though, you can have up to 3 hero points at once, and you start every session with 1. By the way, you lose any remaining hero points at the end of a session. Also, the GM core book tells GMs to reward 1 hero point about once every hour, starting with the second hour of a session, and to reward more if they want a more over-the-top game, or if the group is up against incredible odds and showing immense bravery. There are also 2 discrete ways to use hero points. The first is similar to inspiration. You get to spend 1 hero point to re-roll a check. This is not advantage from D&D, where you roll the check 2 times and keep the better roll. Here, you roll your d20 first, and then you may decide to spend your hero point to improve the roll. So in one sense, it's more powerful because you can save it for those times when your first roll is really bad. But it's less powerful in the sense that you must accept the second roll. You don't keep the better of the 2. It also is a fortune effect, so it does not stack with other effects that have the fortune trait. There's no getting triple advantage in Pathfinder. The second use of hero points is to prevent death. When your dying value would go up, you can prevent that from happening by spending all of your hero points, minimum 1, to avoid death. You end up at 0 hit points, and your wounded value does not increase. By the way, at my table, and I think most tables, your dying value increases for this purpose when you are knocked out. So before getting to the criticisms of hero points, let's talk about why they are the way they are. First, they let characters feel heroic and exceptional. Hero points only apply to PCs, not to monsters. It's really awesome to pull victory out of the jaws of defeat because you spent a hero point. And let's be real, people play games like Pathfinder 2e because they want to win. They want a heroic fantasy. And that leads to our next point. Hero points mitigate randomness that results from the 4 degrees of success system. In Pathfinder, rolling 10 higher or 10 lower than the target DC will give you a critical success or a critical failure. This increases swinginess in the system. I actually did a whole video about this and why it's good for the game, but also talked about why hero points were needed to mitigate that swinginess in a game where, on average, the players are supposed to win against the monsters. Hero points allow players to swing the d20 in their favor. Next, it allows GMs to reward heroic moments and creative play. It gives them a tool to incentivize how they want their players to play. And fourth, this is a preview of one of the criticisms, that your second roll, which you have to accept, might be lower than your first roll. Hero points as written retain tension. You're not guaranteed to get a better result, and so it still remains tense at the table when you say you're using a hero point. In fact, it becomes more tense because you're spending a valuable resource. Now on to some criticisms of hero points. The main criticism I've seen online is that second roll can be worse, and it feels bad to spend a hero point and do worse Not only does it feel bad, but it's also arguably not thematic. On the page that describes hero points, it says to describe your heroic deed as you spend that hero point. Your deed might invoke a lesson learned in a past adventure. It could be spurred by determination to save someone else. But you narrate that as a player and then you roll a critical failure on your second roll. It does not make sense. I'll give my counter to this, and to date I've been using the default hero point rules at all my tables, and that is that, like I said before, it retains excitement and tension. It creates an interesting decision. When you roll a relatively good result on your d20, like a 12 or a 14, maybe you want to save that hero point for when you roll a natural 1 in the future. Or maybe you do want to spend it now because the check you're making is particularly important. Your mileage may vary, but I tend to be a masochist when it comes to my strategy games. I'm a fan of the XCOM computer game, where there's a saying, that's XCOM, baby, when you miss a 99% shot. When playing Pathfinder, my friends and I have been calling it the hero point guarantee whenever we roll worse the second time. All that said, this is a completely valid criticism. Another criticism is that you're not able to use it on enemy rolls. An example being an enemy who critically hits you on a strike. You're not able to spend hero points to affect that, and arguably you should be able to. You're heroic, and avoiding a death blow is heroic. There are, I think, valid reasons for the rule as written now, but I'll get to that when I talk about variant rules. So what got me interested in making this video in the first place was a thread on the subreddit. Somebody wanted to know what they could do to make their players feel they're constantly on the edge of death. I assume they mean their characters. And one of the suggestions was for people to have the doomed condition, which makes you die at less than dying 4, makes you die at dying 3 or even dying 2. And I brought up removing heroic recovery as one of the ways you can use your hero points. You would no longer be able to prevent death. And someone responded that they removed heroic recovery in their game while also buffing hero points, letting players use them on enemy rolls, and also letting them keep the higher of the 2 rolls. They reported that it led to more fun at their table and that it did not noticeably increase the amount of death or near death that happened in their games. And they wrote more about the positive experience that they had. Before I go into the variant rules that I'm thinking of for hero points, or suggesting to the community as fuel for discussion, I want to emphasize that if your table is new to Pathfinder 2e, to use the base rules first, the default rules, and see how you feel about them in play after you give the default rules a chance. The designers have designed the game the way they have, deliberately, and have designed their whole system with the default rules in mind. When considering house ruling something in Pathfinder 2e, think first about why the rule is there to begin with and what problems it's already trying to solve. I refer everybody to look up Chesterton's fence on the internet. So here's one possible variant rule, which is to remove heroic recovery. Now, why would you want to do this? It would encourage using hero points more. The commenter raises another criticism of hero points as written, saying that their players at their tables were always holding on to 1 hero point to reserve it for heroic recovery. They argued that it was generally better to do so in almost all cases because death is the worst condition you can have, this prevents it, and you're assured of its success when you use it. Now, I would argue that's not always true. Optimal play means you sometimes do want to spend your only hero points to change a result, and sometimes you need to spend a hero point to prevent a knockout, and knockouts are very punishing in Pathfinder 2e. But I'm not going to deny that for this group, and I'm sure many other groups, this is a common practice to hoard a hero point. Another effect of removing heroic recovery would be that it would retain tension when a player character is dying. Masochist me is not completely happy if a player character is knocked out, but has 0 chance of dying because they have a hero point. It also would buff the Die Hard feat, which increases how high your dying value has to go for you to die, which my friend Swing Ripper will tell you is not strong as written. But admittedly, removing heroic recovery makes the game deadlier, and I don't want to do that. I like the level of deadliness as it is now. The commenter offset the effect by buffing hero points in other ways, and I wasn't sure I completely was on board with their changes. So that's why I'm talking about this video, to talk about the different ways people have considered buffing hero points so that we can mix and match the changes we want to create the best chili for each of our tables. So there's several changes I've seen discussed to buff hero points. First is to allow rerolls of enemy rolls. The commenter from Reddit said it feels bad to use a top rank spell slot or to spend an expensive consumable item only to have an enemy roll a natural 20 or otherwise critically succeed on their saving throw. Also, I would argue that it thematically makes sense in most situations to be able to re-roll an enemy roll. However, there is a concern about this buff in that it's too much of a buff. It's possible to impose powerful debuffs on enemies, including boss enemies, by forcing them to fail a saving throw. I'm looking at you, Slow and Synesthesia. And so that's why I hesitate about this rule, because the game designed various elements, including these spells, with the current default rules in mind. Alright, another buff to hero points is to allow your hero point to increase your degree of success by 1. I put this in parentheses because the Knights of Last Call channel used this rule in their Rise of the Runelords campaign, their first Pathfinder campaign. Although their GM, Derek, rewarded hero points more rarely than once per hour, they concluded that this was too powerful a buff for hero points. They actually were combining these two buffs in their campaign. It allowed them to force critical failures on their enemies, and also, even if you don't allow it on enemy rolls, auto-increasing something by a degree of success kind of allows you to get critical hits by command against the enemy, and critical successes against the enemy in general, which have an outsized effect on the course of a combat. Rider effects like critical specialization effects or causing persistent fire damage in the case of ignition. The 4 degrees of success system has gated off very powerful things for a reason, and having access to those extremes is fundamentally changing the balance of the game. So that's why I put it in parentheses. Okay, these next changes seek to avoid those feels bad moments that I talked about earlier. First is to make the second roll a d10 die and add 10 to it, or to roll a d20, but your die result is a minimum of 10. Or you can just take the higher of the 2 rolls. This is a weaker buff because it still has the possibility of having a terrible roll. Another buff is to refund the hero point if the second roll is lower than the first. And the last idea is to be more generous with hero points. Maybe they start with 2 at the start of a session, or you reward them at a fixed rate with the passage of time. People will feel less bad on a hero point whiff if they have more hero points to spend later. Now, the variant rule I want to propose to some of my tables for hero points, inspired by that commenter who reported a positive experience with their changes, is the following. Remove heroic recovery as a way to use your hero points. Allow rerolls on enemy rolls, but limit it to enemy attack rolls. So this can prevent critical hits by the enemy that would take player characters out of the fight, but also prevent players from taking an enemy out of a fight, if that makes sense. Also, refunding a hero point if the second roll is lower. So, final thoughts. Let's remember this is a game. The main goal of a game is fun. And there is no one way to play the game that's the best for everybody. Again, I recommend new groups go with the default rules. But ultimately, this is our game. This is our fun to have. I made this video to promote discussion, get people thinking, and I did my best to present the pros and cons of the default rules and all of the various variants. And also, I'm nefarious and selfish. These changes are scary and can lead to more death at a table. And I don't want to be responsible for that. I am outsourcing to viewers the opportunity to playtest these rules because I already have a high level of death. My players will tell you in my games, some of them are streamed. And so I would like to have some assurance first that these rules are good. Meanwhile, I will leave a pinned comment below because my opinion on these things might change over time. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe, support my Patreon if you haven't yet, add free early access to many of my videos, exclusive content, and also join my Discord where we're going to be talking more about this video and also talk about Pathfinder 2e and gaming generally. And it's also a place, if you're interested in playing Pathfinder 2e and don't have a group, you can join our drop-in organized play system called Endless Tale Tavern. So that's it. I've been Ronald the Rules Lawyer. See you next time. Are you more talkative when I record?